Well, all eyes will be on the White House when Prime Minister Mark Carney sits down with U.S. President Donald Trump, a meeting that Trump says could happen within days.
He's a very nice gentleman, and he's going to come to the White House very shortly, within the next week or less.
So while a date for the visit has not been announced, the talks will kick off negotiations for new economic and security agreements the two leaders agreed to in April. Ahead of this potential meeting, Prime Minister Carney is going to give his first post-election press conference, laying out his government's priorities for Canadians. That's going to happen at 11 a.m. Eastern, and our colleagues at CTV News Channel will have that. But in the meantime, for more on how this meeting could unfold, we are joined once again in studio by Charles Bird, principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Welcome back.
Good morning.
Okay, Trump had let's call it a frosty relationship with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. What will Carney need to do at the White House in this round of negotiations? They seem like they're off to a good start. We heard he's a nice gentleman versus he's a governor.
Indeed, and they did talk by phone on March 28th, and it sounds like the visit could happen as early as Tuesday or so, various people in Ottawa are saying. And this is a critically important meeting, needless to say. This is an opportunity for the Prime Minister to strike a degree of personal rapport with the President, which is obviously very important in terms of dealing with Donald Trump, who generally has to be regarded as a 700-pound gorilla. You don't go in there and poke him in the eye. You bring a banana, you compliment him on his fur and those sorts of things. Yeah. Not to get too much into pop psychology, but that element of personal rapport is critical.
Well, I think that it may be pop psychology, but it's also keenly important. This is a president who understands TV. He understands the importance of media. We saw various interactions with world leaders. I mean, Keir Starmer, they brought the invitation from the king. We saw what happened when President Zelensky sat in that very Oval Office. So the optics of everything are very important here.
Oh, it's a high wire act walking into the Oval Office. It's also the best home field advantage known to international
it's on his
affairs.
turf.
Exactly. And it's an intimidating place, but Mark Carney has a lot of experience dealing with world leaders, talking about economic affairs, especially at a time of relative crisis, whether it was Brexit, whether it was the global recession of 08, 09. And so I think he'll be able to establish a good working relationship with the President. And the President's actually reasonably good in those settings. He's Zelensky is the example of things you want to avoid.
Sure.
But most world leaders going into the Oval Office are met warmly, and the dialogue is good, and Trump tends to be very positive.
But they haven't had this history, this verbal exchange, because, you know, Mark Carney has said publicly that our relationship as we know it is done. So that's an interesting place to start these conversations. You know, this country's been very clear about what hurts us hurts them, and about what we want. So when you lay out that list of demands in front of the President, how do those conversations go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think really what you have to remember is, first off, Canada's economy has we've spent decades in close economic partnership with the United States, and all of a sudden, as a result of Donald Trump's return to office, that's been turned on its head.
Yeah.
And the other major challenge is the fact that the President's economic agenda is antithetical to our own. He wants to repatriate manufacturing.
Yeah.
He wants to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States.
Yeah, he says they don't need our cars, they don't need our lumber.
Exactly, exactly. But we're already seeing some positive signs, like the deal that's been struck on automotive parts is hugely significant, a very good sign. And a big shout out to my friend Flavio Volpe for being directly involved therein. And it also speaks to the singular importance of Canadian manufacturers working with their U.S. counterparts, because that's clearly what's happened on the automotive front, is that U.S. automotive manufacturers have stepped up and said, Mr. President, we need to make a change here, otherwise we'll be shutting down plants.
You give a nice plug for Flavio, by the way. He's going to be on the show at 8:30, coming up a little bit later today.
Excellent.
I do want to ask you about who will be with Team Carney when he heads down to the White House.
I think there's a good possibility his Chief of Staff, Marco Mendicino, will be there. There's a very experienced Canada-U.S. relations advisor by the name of Brian Clow, who'll likely be there. I won't be surprised if we see Minister Mélanie Joly, Minister of Global Affairs, Minister LeBlanc, who does international trade and notably security as well. Those are big ticket items, because coming out of the call on March 28th, the conversation is not only economic, it's also about joint security, which is obviously very important to the U.S. administration.
Well, you bring up a really good point, because one of the things that Trump has continually hammered on is about the the issue around fentanyl in our borders. Hopefully, for once and for all, we can get those numbers straight coming out of the White House and what they actually are. They've talked about defense and how he keeps saying that he's underwriting our defense and that Canada has to finally pay its share. So that's a point of contention. It will also just be interesting to see this dialogue back and forth about how they respond to one another in a broken relationship. And CUSMA, which isn't due until next year, but are we potentially looking at the two of them saying, let's start this now?
Well, it's already started at the
Yeah.
officials level between Canadian and U.S. Officials. CUSMA is the big prize. I mean, notwithstanding the nightmare that has been the potential imposition of tariffs, and those tariffs that have already been implemented in terms of automotive, in terms of steel and aluminum, renegotiating CUSMA, whether it's done on a trilateral basis with the Mexicans or even a bilateral basis, and there are some disadvantages to that, going one-on-one with a country as large economically as the Americans, that's really the end game. And that is what will define success. And I think that will be a big part of the Prime Minister's thinking. That said, this meeting is likely a table-setting exercise, which is to identify a number of the big issues, the big irritants, identifying those items which Canada won't be willing to negotiate on, such as our healthcare system being right up there.
Sure, or our sovereignty.
But the stakes are very high. There's no denying it. And I think this is one of the reasons why Canadians elected Mark Carney. They have faith in his abilities.
Well, this is where the rubber hits the road, right? This is where people will see if this is actually going to go the way that they voted for it to go.
Yep.
Charles Bird, principal at Earnscliffe Strategies. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.